A powerful woman who once ran a billion-dollar empire broke down in Congress, not because of shouting, but because of one hidden email, one secret video, and a calm young lawmaker who brought the truth. Think this is a movie? It's not. It's real, and what you're about to witness is how quiet courage shook an entire system. Don't blink. Don't scroll. Watch until the very end, and if you still believe truth should matter more than political theater, subscribe and share this video. Let more Americans know accountability is still possible. The hearing room was packed, the air thick with the quiet tension that only Washington can conjure. C-SPAN cameras panned the chamber. This wasn't a routine oversight session. This was the first congressional review of the Small Business COVID Recovery Fund, a program that had pumped billions of taxpayer dollars into companies during the darkest months of the pandemic. The fund, launched by the Small Business Administration (SBA), under the Trump administration, had drawn quiet criticism, but no one expected fireworks. That is until Jasmine Crockett walked in. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the 43-year-old Democrat from Texas, had just filed her newest legislation, the Fair Recovery Act. The bill demanded a full review of who got what, how they got it, and why so many minority-owned businesses were shut out. She came prepared. Her team had spent months combing through records, FOIA documents, and back-channel communications. She knew what she was about to say, but she also knew she had to wait. Then came Linda McMahon, former head of the SBA, former CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, and one of the most powerful women to emerge from the Trump business orbit. She entered the room with practiced poise, a polished navy suit, and the unmistakable confidence of someone who'd spent decades navigating boardrooms, back rooms, and press rooms. She wasn't just a witness. She was, as some Republican aides whispered the adult in the room. When McMahon was called to deliver her opening remarks, she wasted no time setting a tone not of cooperation, but of quiet contempt. Speaking with ease, she lauded the original program as one of the most efficient rescue operations for America's small business community. She thanked the committee for bringing attention to the need for more innovation in future recovery efforts. Then, without warning, she turned her gaze squarely toward Crockett. With all due respect, McMahon said, eyes locked in and voice controlled. This proposed legislation appears to be crafted by someone who's never actually operated a real business. Lawmakers who don't understand the pressures of payroll overhead or capital investment shouldn't be telling the rest of us how recovery works. Theory doesn't create jobs. Real-world experience does. There it was. The room went still. You could hear the faint tap of a pen somewhere near the witness table, then a few soft chuckles. A couple Republican members shifted comfortably in their chairs, some smirking. One even nodded approvingly. Crockett, she didn't flinch. She didn't fire back. She didn't shake her head. She didn't even raise an eyebrow. Instead, she quietly turned back to the papers in front of her, slowly, deliberately flipping one page, then another. McMahon smiled slightly, as if satisfied she'd made her point. It was a smile that assumed she had the upper hand, that she'd framed the narrative before Crockett could even open her mouth, that she had publicly undercut the credibility of a rising young Congresswoman and gotten away with it. But what Linda McMahon didn't know was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't here for theory. She was here for facts. And the facts buried deep inside agency records and off-the-books correspondences told a very different story. A story Crockett was about to reveal piece by piece. The smirk from McMahon would be the last one seen that day. Because what began as a casual jab, dismissive, confident, even rehearsed, would soon unravel into one of the most uncomfortable reversals ever witnessed in a live congressional hearing. The cameras were rolling. America was watching. And Crockett was just getting started. Jasmine Crockett didn't say a word. Not yet. After Linda McMahon's smug dismissal of her business experience in Part 1, the hearing room had settled into a tense kind of stillness. McMahon was leaning back comfortably still, wearing that self-assured grin, the kind that said, "I've won this round." The older lawmakers on her side of the aisle looked pleased. Even the chairman was glancing at the clock, expecting the standard back and forth to begin. But Crockett wasn't reaching for notes. She wasn't holding up charts or quoting law. She was standing. And then she spoke, calm, clear, and unshaken. "Mr. Chairman, with the committee's permission," she said, "I'd like to share a brief video clip, one the American people haven't seen." Yet. The chairman nodded. A few heads turned. One of Crockett's aides slid a laptop forward, already connected to the projection system. The screens flickered to life. At first, there was just grainy footage, handheld slightly shaky, but the audio was clear. What the room was watching was not a government training session. It was not a media appearance. It was a private business retreat, recorded quietly by someone in the back row. The banner above the stage read Twentway, Small Business Coalition Forum, 4 Seasons, D.C. The date stamped October 12, 2020. Then came the voice, recognizable, sharp, unmistakable. Linda McMahon, standing on stage holding a mic, speaking not in her usual poised, bureaucratic tone, but candidly off-script, casual among friends. If your application comes through the normal channels, she was saying, you might be waiting months. And by then, funds will dry up. That's just how DC works. Laughter. But if you're in this room, then you know the path is a little clearer. Use the version of the form we sent last week. Don't send it through the portal. Send it directly to Tom. He'll handle it. Internally. The room watching the video went dead silent. "Trust me," McMahon continued on screen. "We can't say this publicly, but we're trying to make sure our people, the right people, get through. We're in this together." Crockett didn't look at McMahon. She just stood quietly, arms crossed, watching along with everyone else. McMahon, sitting at the witness table, suddenly wasn't so comfortable anymore. Her expression shifted, not panic, but the kind of startled awareness that happens when you realize the cameras are still rolling, and you have just become the story. She opened her mouth. "Congresswoman." "I'd like to clarify, Ms. McMahon," the chairman interrupted. "You'll have your chance to respond. The Congresswoman has the floor." McMahon glanced at her attorney behind her. He said nothing. The video played on. The lighting in the hotel ballroom dimmed as the clip ended. Silence fell like a gavel. Crockett stepped forward. "No theatrics, just facts." "That clip was recorded by a former small business owner in my district," she said. "One who didn't get $1 in federal recovery aid. He followed the official guidelines, filed everything properly, and was denied twice. He watched his business of 27 years fold, while watching others get fast-tracked behind closed doors." She let that sit for a beat. "What the video shows is more than just poor judgment," she said. "It's a system one built on access, back channels, and privilege. And it was encouraged, not discouraged, by the person tasked with leading the SBA during our country's greatest economic crisis since the Great Depression." McMahon was stone still. No more smiles. Crockett continued. "That meeting wasn't open to the public. It wasn't posted on any official calendar. And the application form Ms. McMahon refers to in that video. We have it. It's not the same one that was available to the public. It omits key eligibility fields and routes directly to a personal email address linked to her former assistant, Thomas Kelly." The chairman leaned forward slightly, his pen motionless. "I'll be submitting both the video and the altered application form into the committee record," Crockett said. McMahon finally spoke, but this time Her voice lacked its earlier edge. I believe some of that footage is taken out of context, she said, her tone shaky. We were trying to reach underserved sectors. Crockett didn't blink. We'll get to the numbers in a moment, she said. But first I want the American people to see clearly this wasn't a theory. This was a two-track system, one for the well-connected, one for everyone else. And just like that, the narrative shifted. In a matter of minutes, Linda McMahon had gone from confident expert witness to the central figure in a scandal that had just been shown literally on screen. The smirks were gone. Even her Republican allies looked uncertain. Staffers whispered. Journalists tweeted. And Crockett. She sat back down finally and adjusted her microphone. She didn't need a raised voice. She didn't need a dramatic speech. All she needed was the truth, and a video no one was supposed to see. The room was still reeling from the hotel video, the off-the-record remarks, the back-channel admissions, the audience of insiders. But Representative Jasmine Crockett wasn't finished. Not even close. What the public had just seen was the tip of the iceberg. The damage to Linda McMahon's credibility was already visible. Her voice had trembled. Her grip on the hearing table had tightened, yet the storm was only beginning. Crockett reached into her bag and pulled out a red folder, thick and tabbed every edge, crisp, every page numbered. She held it up for the cameras, not for theatrics, but for clarity. What the American people saw in that video, Crockett said, was a policy of favoritism spoken aloud. What's in this folder? What we're about to enter into the official congressional record is how that favoritism was executed. She opened the folder. This document, she began holding up the first packet, is a list of 40 companies that received a combined total of $72 million in SBA pandemic recovery funds. Each of these companies was approved during a 4-month window in early 2021, when Ms. McMahon's influence inside the agency was still active through informal advisory roles. She paused for just a breath. Of those 40 companies, she continued, 33 have direct ties to either Ms. McMahon's political network or her business past. A shuffle echoed across the chamber. Let's break that down, she said. Flipping to page 2, 19 were run by executives who had donated personally or through PACs to McMahon-affiliated campaigns between 2016 and 2020. 11 had senior board members with previous roles at WWE, either as corporate officers or outside contractors. And 3 of these businesses list Ms. McMahon herself as a guest speaker or advisory board member during the application period. Crockett's voice didn't rise. She didn't need to shout. The facts were doing the shouting for her. Now you might ask, were these businesses qualified? She smiled slightly. Flipping to the next section. Here's the issue. None of them met all the public SBA criteria at the time. Several exceeded the employee count. Others had annual revenues of over $50 million, well beyond the $5 million limit for pandemic aid, to be considered small business relief. And then came the punch. Exhibit B, she said, pulling out the second tabbed section. This is a sworn statement from a former SBA compliance officer who requested anonymity under whistleblower protection. According to this individual, many of these priority applications never passed through the full 3-stage review process required by SBA internal policy. She flipped to page 6 and read aloud. Dozens of applications were routed through a private Gmail address linked to Thomas Kelly. We were told not to question it. Mr. Kelly claimed he was acting on instructions from Ms. McMahon. Those files were always marked expedite. That name rang out like a warning bell. Thomas Kelly, McMahon's longtime personal assistant at WWE, who later joined her staff at the SBA. He wasn't a compliance expert. He wasn't a program officer. Yet somehow he'd been positioned to greenlight millions in taxpayer dollars, with little to no oversight. And then Crockett dropped the real hammer. Email correspondence dated February 4th, 2021. She said, pulling out one last printed page. From Linda McMahon to Thomas Kelly. Subject line, urgent list, move quickly. She read the message aloud. These businesses are strategic. We need to make sure they're processed first. They've kept us alive. Handle directly. Not review carefully. Not double-check eligibility. Just handle directly. Crockett turned toward McMahon, who now sat still as stone. Her face drained of the earlier smugness. I ask the committee and the American people, what kind of recovery plan chooses political loyalty over fairness? What kind of leadership bypasses vetting to reward connections, while real small business owners are left waiting or worse, shut down? No one answered, because there was nothing to say. The chairman, visibly unsettled, leaned forward. These documents, Crockett said, are being formally submitted for committee review. They've been verified by independent auditors, and they confirm what that hotel video suggested. The program was manipulated. Not by accident, not by oversight, but by design. She returned to her seat, folding her hands. The red folder sat on the witness table. Now its pages spread, its contents undeniable. Across the room, journalists scrambled to update headlines. Staffers whispered behind folders. Even McMahon's legal counsel sat back in his chair, suddenly quiet. It was no longer about image. It was no longer about credentials or confidence. This was about truth, printed, time-stamped, and exposed under oath. And in less than 20 minutes, everything had changed. The trusted businesswoman with decades of influence was now facing a legacy-threatening investigation. And Jasmine Crockett, who had been dismissed with a smile and a jab, had just redefined the balance of power with nothing more than a folder and the facts. By now, the hearing had transformed from a policy discussion into a slow-motion collapse of public confidence, one broadcast live to the entire nation. Linda McMahon, once the composed titan of business and politics, was unraveling in front of the very institution she once advised. Just minutes earlier, Representative Jasmine Crockett had calmly laid down the final pieces, a list of 40 questionable grant recipients' sworn testimony from a whistleblower inside the SBA, and a devastating email from McMahon herself directing preferential treatment to political allies. The red folder had done its job. Facts had pierced through reputation. Now, all eyes turned to McMahon. She adjusted her microphone and leaned forward. The shift in her posture was small, but telling her shoulders no longer squared, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't recall the exact context of that email," she began. It wasn't defiant. It wasn't calculated. It was the sound of a person who had run out of exits. Crockett didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat. She simply replied without blinking. "My constituents don't need you to remember Mrs. McMahon. They need you to take responsibility." The words didn't sting because they were loud. They stung because they were true. And the cameras caught everything. McMahon reached for her water glass. Her hand trembled. She took a long sip, then another. The silence in the hearing room was deafening. No one interrupted. No one leaned back. Even her allies on the committee were quiet now, their earlier smirks replaced with blank stares. You could feel the gravity in the room, something rare in modern politics, a moment too real to spin. Then it happened. The camera zoomed in as McMahon, sitting motionless, lifted a tissue to her eye and gently wiped away a tear. She tried to look down to compose herself, but it was too late. The image was already captured, broadcast on C-SPAN, clipped within seconds on social media, frozen in high definition. A woman who once held the reins of one of the most powerful entertainment companies in the world, who had sat at the cabinet table, now exposed not to scandalous rumor, but to undeniable documentation and public truth. The committee chairman, visibly moved by the unraveling scene, cleared his throat and spoke softly. "We'll take a 10-minute recess. No debate, no chatter, just silence." Staffers rose from their seats, slowly unsure whether to move quickly or respectfully. Crockett sat still, quietly stacking her documents. McMahon remained seated at the witness table, her hands resting motionless beside the now iconic red folder. She didn't look at anyone. Her attorney leaned in, whispered something. She nodded but didn't speak. The hearing room just an hour earlier, filled with partisan energy and confident exchanges, now felt like a church sanctuary after a thunderstorm. And the country was watching. In homes across America, particularly among the generation who had lived through Watergate, Iran-Contra, and the public fallout of powerful figures, this moment didn't feel like theater. It felt familiar, a reckoning, quiet, but real. Older viewers understood the weight of watching someone fall, not because of noise or narrative, but because the evidence had finally outpaced the performance. When the hearing resumed, something had changed. McMahon no longer looked like the witness who had opened the session with confidence and charm. She looked like a person who had seen the wall and run straight into it. And more importantly, she knew the nation had seen it too. But what made the moment unforgettable wasn't just the collapse, it was Crockett's restraint. She didn't smile. She didn't jab. She didn't go for the kill. She sat, steady, silent, letting the truth do the talking. Because in that moment, Crockett wasn't just a lawmaker. She was a mirror. And Linda McMahon, for the first time in her long public career, had to look directly into it. The hearing resumed not with fire, but with quiet. Following the recess, the atmosphere in the chamber had shifted. What had started as a fiery exchange, backed by video revelations, insider whistleblowers, and a red folder full of damning evidence, had in the span of one tear and 10 minutes of silence become something else entirely. The tone was no longer combative. It was reverent, almost solemn. Everyone sensed they were watching not just a confrontation, but a reckoning. And now perhaps a chance at redemption. Linda McMahon leaned back into the microphone. Gone was the polished, media-trained executive who had brushed off the hearing's opening moments with casual arrogance. In her place sat a woman clearly weighed down, not just by the documents on the table, but by the magnitude of what they revealed. Her voice was lower now, uneven, but steady enough to be understood. "I'm not proud of every decision made under my leadership," she began. "If there were mistakes, and it appears there were, I accept responsibility for the part I played. There were no caveats, no deflections, no calls for context. It wasn't a full confession, but it was the closest thing Washington had heard in a long time to a public admission from a figure of that stature. And it didn't go unnoticed. All eyes turned to Representative Jasmine Crockett. She had the room. She had the power. She had every reason to press further, to keep squeezing until the apology was public, painful, and final. But she didn't. She didn't need to. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her tone as measured as ever, but now laced with something that hadn't been heard yet in the hearing grace. "Mrs. McMahon, I didn't come here today hoping to see someone fall," she said. "I came here hoping to see the system rise." There was no triumph in her voice, only clarity. "People in my district don't want revenge," she continued. "They want accountability. But more than that, they want to know the next small business, the next struggling entrepreneur won't be shut out just because they didn't know someone on the inside. That's when Crockett made a move few expected not to demand, but to invite. I'm introducing the Fair Recovery Act, which would eliminate loopholes, enforce independent reviews, and bring full transparency to the grant approval process. Mrs. McMahon, given what you've seen and admitted today, would you be willing to support these reforms publicly? The question wasn't just rhetorical, it was symbolic. An outstretched hand in the middle of a political battlefield. McMahon took a moment. Then she nodded. Yes, she said quietly. I would support that. It wasn't dramatic. There were no applause breaks, no viral one-liners. But it was in its own way electric. Because it wasn't just an agreement. It was a bridge. This wasn't the kind of moment that cable news usually captured, Mel. There was no shouting, no name-calling, no walkouts. But for those watching, especially the older generation, who had seen decades of scorched earth politics, it felt like something rare. A conversation that had started with an insult was ending in mutual acknowledgement. After weeks of bipartisan discussion and national media attention, it passed with a staggering 389 votes in favor, a rare display of unity in a chamber so often defined by division. The bill, born in a moment of public collapse, became a legislative landmark. It mandated independent panels for federal small business grant reviews, required public audit trails for major award decisions, and banned the use of unofficial channels for application submission. It even required all communications related to grant prioritization to be archived and made accessible for oversight. But most importantly, it restored something far more valuable than any political win: public trust. 9 months after the bill's passage, the results spoke for themselves. The Small Business Administration underwent a full procedural overhaul. Review teams were diversified. Systems were digitized. Transparency dashboards were rolled out to every congressional office and in the districts that had long been left behind, particularly those with high minority and rural small business populations. Change was real. According to the latest SBA report, the approval rate for small businesses in underserved communities had tripled, with billions of dollars redirected to local entrepreneurs who had previously been shut out by favoritism and bureaucratic red tape. What began as a political clash had become a civic correction. Yet even beyond policy, the moment had ripple effects elsewhere. The video of the hearing, spanning just under 90 minutes, was downloaded over 1 million times in the weeks following McMahon's testimony. But it didn't just go viral. It went institutional. Within months, 4 major law and policy schools, Georgetown, Yale, Stanford, and the University of Texas, added the hearing as required material in ethics, public administration, and political leadership seminars. Professors didn't just point to the facts. They pointed to tone, restraint, clarity of purpose. They studied the moment when truth overcame image, when an insult gave way to accountability, and when a rising lawmaker chose reform over revenge. Older Americans, especially those who'd witnessed decades of hearings, resignations, and political scandal, recognized the significance. Not because someone powerful cried on camera, but because someone stood up not to destroy, but to rebuild. And that may be the most lasting legacy of all. The McMahon-Crockett exchange wasn't just a news cycle event. It was a return to a form of public service that too often feels lost, and where truth is louder than spin, where dignity holds the final word, and where a red folder, a quiet voice, and a bold idea can still change the country. In a world where headlines are dominated by shouting matches and political theatrics, this hearing reminded us of something deeply American and deeply powerful. Quiet truth still matters. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She raised the facts. She didn't humiliate her opponent. She offered a path to reform. And in doing so, she reminded all of us, especially those of us who've lived long enough to see generations of leaders rise and fall, that integrity is not a relic. It's a responsibility. The lesson here isn't just for Washington. It's for each of us. Whether you're leading a business serving your community or simply showing up for your family, how you deliver truth can matter as much as the truth itself. Calm preparation and moral clarity don't always make the most noise, but they leave the deepest mark. If this message speaks to you, leave a comment below. What moment in your life taught you that quiet strength matters? And if you want more stories where facts rise above the noise, hit that subscribe button. Let's bring dignity back into the national conversation together.